Hi there, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video we are going to continue our look at painting the BladeGuard Veteran Primaris Marine in the Brazen Claws chapter, and in this video we are going to work on some non-metallic metal gold, NMM for y'all. Get us started, we're going to use some Wraith Bone from Citadel. This is a nice little bone color. Now this color I find is pretty close to Screaming Skull, but because it is in the base category of Citadel's naming of paint lines, I do find this to be quite rich in pigment, and it does not take much to create even coverage on a surface. So I just thin it down with the dampness of the brush and begin laying this on top of the icons, the skull on his knee pad, his forehead, as well as his halo around his helmet. And of course we'll work on the shield as well. As the trim of the shield we will finish in a non-metallic gold. We could just as easily use a color like Screaming Skull to apply onto these areas, but because it is a layer paint, and we would probably have to lay quite a few layers down, and I just don't really feel like doing that, so which is why I'm using the Wraith Bone to get nice even coverage. And so this is what it looks like after 2 layers. I also am applying it so that it gets smooth even coverage, so a lot of it won't be shown. Nazdrag Yellow is next. This is Citadel Contrast. We're going to use some Contrast Medium. I'm going to lay 2 drops onto my palette, and I'm going to take a fairly generous amount into my brush and then give that a thorough mixing. Basically, I mix till I see no more marbling in the paint. Very carefully here, we apply this. I do not apply it in such a fashion that it gets very heavy pooling anywhere. I just want even coverage on a surface. Where there's a minimal amount of pooling, I simply just draw the excess away from the surface, and just really all I'm looking for is that really kind of bright yellow. But anywhere where it gets a little too deep, or a little bit heavy in its application, we just basically allow it to reside there and just create some of the definition. But otherwise, all we're really looking for is that really kind of bright tone of yellow and a little bit of that warmer values where it falls into the recesses and gives us that nice little bit of separation. And realistically, right from that point forward, it actually looks okay. If we were going for this kind of sort of non-metallic metal vibe on the surface, you pretty much could do this and apply a second layering in a similar fashion in which we work with the colors from here on out. But otherwise, you pretty much could just leave it as such and just go for this nice, golden yellow color on the model. Argyros Dune is next, the Citadel Contrast with some Contrast Medium. Again, I'm going to do 2 drops with 1 generous amount in my brush. Give it a thorough mixing until I see no more marbling. And with this, in typical non-metallic metal fashion, this is more of a stylized approach, of course, we are going to increase the value in the high points, or in the, kind of in the north-south type of direction. We're going to increase the saturation in the northern sector of each of the little details. So basically, we're creating it darker as we work higher on these details. Again, with the sort of details on the model, the skull, like on the forehead, it gets darker up towards the top. It's kind of like how we do gemstones and things of that nature, where we increase the saturation and depth of color as we work higher up the model. As we head north, as it were. I'm trying to think of a way to describe that so that you completely understand what I'm talking about here. But yeah, so as we work our way up the details, we get deeper and darker with the color. And if we really want to create something really contrasty, we could push this all the way towards a black color, representing, the shadowy points and such. Really, when we are talking about non-metallic metal surfaces, typically we are working in this fashion where we're kind of going for this stylized approach. This is not a true representation of a metallic surface, as there would be ambient reflections in that surface, and we would have to paint that. But to do that, you would have to kind of visualize what the environment is, as again, reflection is all about the environment and lighting and, you know, all these things to consider. This is a stylized approach to it, so this is really just, you know, kind of like if you were seeing comic book art or, you know, an album cover, you know what I mean? Like all these different kind of iterations of creating this impression of a reflective metallic surface. And that's all we often do on these miniatures, is when we're doing this kind of a technique. Snakebite Leather is next, and yes, of course, some contrast medium, 2 drops, and a generous amount in the brush, as you can see there. I say generous, but it's really more like just kind of 1 drop of it, really. It's kind of 2 medium to 1 contrast paint is really that ratio, is what I'm representing there. Again, with this little layering, we are pushing the color ever so darker, and because of the nature of this color, I also apply it along the sides and in the details, in the eyeballs of the skulls, and all these other little things, just to help create separation. And on the icons on the forearm and the hanging from his belt and everything like that, we also lay this darker color along the sides, and it's not quite shown in the video here, but I also paint the sides of the icon as well. And the skull, I just go in and create deeper tone on the upper portion of the forehead, in the eye sockets, the nose, around the teeth. Here on this detail, I push it around the little bolts and, you know, around the perimeter of the detail as well, where it gets close to the armor. On the icon, again, where I was pushing the shadows or the deeper tones, is kind of 2 sectors on the forward-facing ring, where it gets deeper. And then, of course, I also apply it on the each of the little facets of each of the little spokes on the halo. The upper portions, I create darker tone and then push that out towards the tips of each of the little spikes, just really for aesthetics. And on the shield here, again, we just simply build up our tones in a similar fashion to what we did on the other, the halo, and that central halo on the this cross, I guess, on the shield. And again, it's just, you know, a stylized approach. Just, you know, the rule of thumb is just push the color darker as you work north, the high point, right? And you stay brighter along the bottom point. Now again, with all these layers of contrast, it does start to get a little bit glossy, but that's not a big concern because we can always hit this with a matte afterwards. I'm going to come in with some Snakebite Leather right out of the pot and just very carefully, again, deepen up some of those points of contrast. So it's very, very little we're using here, but we're simply just going around, you know, picking out little details here and there, and of course laying it down wherever we want that intensity of contrast. On the icon on his belt, the skull, and the other on his vambrace or his wrist armor there, we create the deeper tone off to one side. And again, this just helps the eye recognize that we're looking at this impression of a metallic surface, a gold metallic surface. And again, going about this kind of fashion on a model surface, creating this non-metallic metal look, again, it's a stylized approach. It's not realistic. It's not how metal reflects the ambient environment. And, you know, how do we know what the ambient environment is for made-up sci-fi type stuff? We don't. So that's why oftentimes you see this stylized approach to non-metallic metal being applied like this on a model surface. And so realistically, again, it's always what gets deeper color is the facets or the angles that face upwards into the sky. Now, again, we could also apply other theory as far as like creating, you know, the horizon lines and, you know, introducing, say, a bit of a blue tinge to represent the sky and, you know, brown or green tinge to represent the ground. And, you know what I mean? We could do all these things, but we're busting into a different theory of non-metallic metal, as it were. And again, the shield here, just pushing that color deeper and deeper, working around the edges, the perimeter, and of course every facet that faces upwards gets darker and everything that's pointing downwards gets brighter. Screaming Skull is next, and I guess we're going to use some Lamian medium just to thin it out ever so slightly. It's kind of a 1-to-1 mix kind of ratio. Just a quick mix on the palette, get it all nice and smooth and silky. And with this, we are going to push the color down towards. So because the color is thinned out, we can work with it in a very thinned out consistency. We build up to our effect, but that's how we're going to create nice smooth gradients. And with this, on the icon on the belt, I really only highlight one side of that belt. And then of course I create a little dot to represent the catch light on the surfaces, because we're representing obviously a metallic, shiny, reflective surface. So the upper portions will get that. We could also use white to represent that catch light highlight on the top of surfaces, but I just use the Screaming Skull because it's tiny little details and it doesn't really matter. You can see here some areas I do apply a little bit too much color. But we can correct that, which I will afterwards. Here on the skull, I simply just highlight the bottom portions, catching the teeth, the nose, the bottom of the cheekbone, the brow, and then of course I create the little catch highlight on the top of the skull as well. I end up laying a little too much color on the top of the skull, but we can always correct that afterwards. Of course, when we are laying this color down, we do end up knocking a lot of the saturation out. So there's really a lot of the yellow has been lost at this point. Here, I'm just simply turning the Screaming Skull into a glaze and just create a little finer transition on that skull up on the upper brow portion. Again, it is kind of representing the, the brighter reflection from the downward direction. Oftentimes you see with this, metallic effect going on the tiny skull on the head. Again, I just highlight one side of it. And really, when you're dealing with a lot of these small little details, these tiny little highlights go a long way. So it is, an art in subtlety. You can see there some of those areas are just a little too much highlight. I have the wrong angle actually, and I'm kind of highlighting the facet rather than I'm trying to catch that edge that runs through the halo spikes or whatever they're called. I don't know, the little patterning on the spikes there. It's kind of like a sword, right? It's got the little facets. Anyway, you can see on the ring itself, we just catch just the edge. And I don't do the entire perimeter of it. I actually kind of do it more of a stylized. Anywhere where it gets darker, I put that highlight on above it. Again, so for the visual contrast of it all, because really going for these kinds of looks on models, especially with this stylized approach to non-metallic metal, it is often about basically whatever direction you push that color, wherever it gets darker, you immediately frame it with a brighter color just along its perimeter or its edges, so that you get that really kind of contrasty look. And that's really what it's all about. And you can see, like on this part here, you can see how we push the edges on both sides of the detail, but it gives us that nice framing and gives us that impression of the non-metallic metal look. Here we're going to come back in with some Snakebite Leather. I'm using just the dampness of the brush to thin the color out, and here I'm trying to catch the upper portion of a lot of these spikies on the halo. Here I'm taking a little bit generous amount of water, found it was a little too much generous, so I just add a little bit more Snakebite Leather. And then of course with that thinned out glaze, I just simply lay it on top of some of the areas just to resaturate some of the color and push that brighter tone. It was really on the skulls that I was just not happy with how bright that catch highlight was on there. So I just used a little bit of this color just to bring it back down. On some of the spikes, it was just a little too intense, so I used this color just to bring it down a bit and, not make it look so, obviously kind of silly, really is what it is. But that is it. That is non-metallic metal gold on this guy. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this series on this model and been painting along, and hopefully it's inspiring you guys to get your Marines done from the Indomitus box set, BladeGuard Veterans. You know how I love my Primaris. Big thank you to my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. If you're considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below and you'll be taken off to Patreon, where a huge thank you to everybody who does. Take care of those brushes and they will take care of you.